Welcome to Board Game Binge, the place where we bring you bite-sized, bingeable board game content from across the industry. I'm your host, James Staley, and in this episode, we're welcoming back Will and David from Absurdist Productions. Their latest title, set in the traditional Cherokee Nation folklore, is currently on Kickstarter. Gentlemen, welcome back to the binge. How you doing?
Hi,
Doing
good.
great.
Glad to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's great having you guys back. I mean, so for those who don't know Absurdist Productions, I encourage you to go back to episode, I believe it was 190. I can't believe it's been over 100 and some odd episodes since we've had you on the podcast. But definitely the game we're going to talk about today caught my attention. I'm like, oh, I got to talk to these guys about this. This is right up my alley. And so those who want to kind of get the prior history, go back to episode 190. And today we're going to cover off their newest title. But first, gents, let's start off with those. For those who don't know who Absurdist Productions is, can you just give us kind of a quick overview of the company and kind of how you guys came about?
Yeah. So we are a small production company. We're out of Oklahoma City, owned by me and Dave. We started our company in 2017. We published our first title in 2019 or 2018, actually. And we've done a few role-playing games, and Winter Rabbit will be our third board game.
Yep. Yeah, we came together to publish a crazy little card game I'd come up with about fighting over food at a Brazilian steakhouse, which people kept calling absurd, which led to the company name.
That's awesome.
And we kept on going from there.
Yep.
And then last time you were on the podcast, you talked about PaleoVet was the game you had launched at that time, which was super cool, funded quite well for you guys. How did you feel? Like, did that campaign go well for you? Did you find her?
Yeah. PaleoVet was great. PaleoVet, like our goal is just to kind of push each campaign forward just a little bit more, and PaleoVet did really well for us. And it's continued to sell even after the crowdfunding. It's and a few stores around and things, and I've been really happy with it. It's a family weight game that is also like totally good for like adult game nights.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of people have really enjoyed it. A lot of people have really liked how accessible it is, and I've had just a really good time with that one. It's really nice to hear people come back and say that they've been playing it, so.
And the fulfillment's completely done on that game now?
Yeah, we've fulfilled all that, and we fulfilled that a little while back last year sometime. We finished it out.
Congratulations on that, by the way, because I know, especially in today's day and age, right? Yeah, I'm sure I know you guys back games as well, and I'm sure we all have that story of that game that we're still waiting for years later. So, high five every time I hear of a publisher, chalk one up for the good guys, right? And kind of swaying the positive vibes back towards no, people do fulfill campaigns. It's just a couple bad apples that are causing the bad name for everyone else, right?
It's a lot of work to make sure that it works.
Yeah, it is. It's, and I often talk about this on the podcast, is that, it's one thing to create a game. It's a whole nother endeavor to publish, right? Self-publishing, it's literally a business you're running. And I know you guys both have, day jobs that you work at that, you've gained various skill sets at, but still kind of encapsulating board game publishing as a whole from kind of start to finish. There's still a lot of learnings in there that you learn as you go along, right?
Yeah, and I think we've learned something with every campaign we've done. We've made mistakes every single time, and we've done a little bit better every single time. So we're still learning, and we probably always will be. But I think as long as you just keep pushing it forward and and fixing those mistakes and finding new mistakes, I think you're doing good.
Yeah, I think it's Jamie Stagmeyer, even someone like that's been there, kind of the OG right from the beginning, still talks about his learnings, right, and still publishes things. So I think the moment that you stop kind of seeking out, okay, what can I figure out from this, or what can I learn and improve upon, it's probably time to kind of hang up the gloves, I think, and move on, right? So
yeah, you don't want to get stagnant. You don't want to just kind of stop or rest, because the industry is going to change up from under you if you stop. We got to keep.
I mean,
this.
We saw that with even some mid-sized companies with COVID and the all what that did to freight prices. There's a bunch of mid-sized companies that don't exist anymore because they thought they were good, and then COVID threw everything out of whack.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. Those were tough times. It's kind of like a twofold where the demand for games climbed, right? Because a lot of people were
Hmm.
kind of stuck in their homes, but at the same time, the whole, as you said, the whole cost structure changed globally, right? Not just even delivering the games, but even sourcing materials.
Hmm.
Paper costs went through the roof and things like this,
Yep.
right? So it was. For those that were able to weather the storm, they probably come out the backside of that a lot stronger. So with this game, what caught my eye was this kind of tie into the Cherokee Nation,
Mhm.
and we were just saying before we went on air here in Canada, where I'm from, and when we talk about the Cherokee Nation, during this podcast, let's try to explain to people like
Sure.
what's different with Cherokee Nation, where they're
Hmm.
located, and so forth, for those globally who may not be aware. But in the Canada, United States, well, basically North America, we have a lot. Well, even I guess South America as well. There's a lot of indigenous populations that have not always had the best of time, right? And certainly here in Canada, through Truth and Reconciliation, residential schools, and some of the issues we've had up here. Um, I think that any way we can help kind of educate people, right, on the culture, I think is a positive thing, right? So even when I see something like a game that has traditional art in it, and you're hiring a traditional artist, right, who's a Cherokee
Yeah.
artist,
Mhm.
and kind of pulling in some of these stories, to me, it's like, okay, through play, this gives somebody a chance to kind of learn even a little bit about the culture, which I think is a good thing. And then I've seen some things we'll talk about in your campaign page as well, where people have an ability to give back, right, and help spread some of that joy back into some of the reservations and so forth as well. So
Mhm.
let's start off with kind of at the top. How did this come about? Where, and I guess we'll just say, Will, you're Cherokee
Sure.
yourself, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But the decision to say, you know what, we're gonna kind of put a stake in the sand here on this one, and we're gonna take this game, and we want to kind of anchor it in these traditional stories. What was the decision process that you went through for that?
Yeah, it was a long process. I've been working on this game for years, off and on.
Mm,
I started it before I started PaleoVet and kind of set it down for a while and picked it back up because I really wanted to get a lot of stuff in there, right?
yeah.
So when I started this, I started kind of becoming inspired by some other indigenous creators, who, especially in like video games and things like that. And there's a couple other people that are doing it in board games. And I thought that was a really cool idea. And so I started trying to think about how I could bring that part of my heritage into the game.
Mm,
So for the record, I am an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. There are three Cherokee tribes in the United States. They're all like separate entities, but all sort of have the same cultural, historical background. Um, and when I started this, I basically wanted to come up with this idea of a way to not just in the theme of the game, but in the mechanics and the way it plays, apply ideas that were more indigenous, that were more specific to Cherokee and other indigenous groups, um, and find something that was sort of like kind of turning Euro game ideas on their heads.
yeah.
And so I had some conversations with some other people, and we were talking about the 4X genre of games, right? So the 4X's being like explore, expand, exploit, exterminate, like this very imperialistic kind of colonial kind of like
Yeah.
idea. And so we sort of came up with this 4C framework, which is like cultivation, continuation, um, competition, and what is the other one? No, I'm forgetting now that I'm on
Uh,
here.
it's a con. No, you said
Conservation.
conservation.
Conservation is the other one. Yeah. So using those ideas, building a game that isn't about continuous expansion, exploitation, and conquering. It's about um, balance and growing sustainably and building community and these other ideas that are just wrapped up in my culture. And Winter Rabbit was the product of that, right? And
Mm,
it took a lot of iteration to get it there. And it is a semi-cooperative game because part of it is about bringing the community together and building this village and getting the village ready for winter. But part of it is also competitive because it's about doing the most and giving the best and kind of like earning those bragging rights by what you can do, right? Like a lot of traditional games are all very competitive, and so I wanted to bring that aspect in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, I just wanted to make sure that all of the folklore and the history and the art was all authentic, like absolutely authentic. So we worked with two fantastic Cherokee artists, Kendra Swafford and Johnny Ketcher. Kendra did all the watercolor illustrations in the game. Johnny did all the digital art. And working with them was fantastic because it also gave us this opportunity to kind of like go back over the way things were depicted, like think about the historical accuracy of the images and like what cards were even in the game. You know, like at one time I had a well card, and then after talking about it for a while, we were like, well, we probably didn't have a well as like a fixture of a village back then. We just lived by a creek or a river, so you didn't need. So like we talking with them like enabled us to get like all of those details about the art and the designs to be super accurate. Um, so yeah, I think I've gone beyond your initial question now.
That's
but,
all right. So was there some
Yeah.
of the like when you're going into kind of the historical aspect and trying to be historically accurate, is there also an element of that trying to also at the same time put a kind of a modern spin on it?
So sort of, because we definitely like the way we think about history and culture definitely changes over time, right?
Yeah.
Like as we sort of decolonize our ideas of what the history was, right? Like for a long time, most of what we knew, a lot coming down from like oral tradition and like preserved knowledge, but a lot of it also just coming from, European historians and missionaries and things like that, right? Like, so you have a very different like idea of your own history because of that. And so, in a lot of ways, there are a lot of people who are doing really great things now by redefining that history and not just like rewriting it, right? But like understanding it in a different way, understanding it in an indigenous context that is like, from our point of view, right? Like how that looks.
Yeah.
And so, we're looking at like a modern game design, right? Like a game that is very much built out of the tradition of modern board games and even Euro games and things, but brings in these sort of like other ideas from this other lens, right? These ideas about not wanting to be completely overproducing resources, about like a little bit of like social interaction in there in some different ways that I don't really see in other games. So I think you do get a little bit of a mix of some modern and some past, and of course the art styles too are a mix, right? Like watercolor is not necessarily like a traditional Cherokee like art style, but that's what Kendra uses, and she does it like combining it with a lot of really cool designs and motifs that are traditional, right? So you can see that in the art styles that are in there, using the watercolor and the digital art.
Yeah, that's the same thing for all the iconography that Johnny designed for us. She did a lot of research on traditional icons, imagery, and then she put kind of little modern twists on it, making sure we weren't co-opting anything that, and make sure it was all
Yep.
it was all done right.
And then you still had decided to bring in this cultural consultant. Some might say, well, given that you've got Cherokee artists and you're Cherokee yourself, what was the thought process behind that of saying, what, we still think we want to bring in this cultural consultant? Where's your head on that one?
Right. I think when you're doing something so specific as this, specifically about our culture and their traditions, it is really important to do that, even if it is your own culture. And that's something that I really do firmly believe, because I don't know everything. I'm not a historian. I'm not a linguist. I'm a game designer. And, I grew up in the reservation. I grew up like hearing a lot of these stories, but that doesn't make me an expert. Um, it makes me connected to it, definitely, but it doesn't make me an expert. So bringing in somebody who was an expert really helped, and JW was able to give us like some insight. And I also did a lot of research before I, before I brought him on,
Mhm.
and it was actually just nice and validating to have somebody who is an expert look at the stuff that I put together, and say, "Oh yeah, you actually got a lot of this right. There's a few little details here and there."
Mhm.
But it was really validating knowing that a lot of what I put together was accurate and good. And on top of that, he also did our translations. So
Mm.
I'm learning the language. I know a little bit here and there, but I am definitely by no means up to the task of translating this game into Cherokee. But we wanted to make it available in the Cherokee language as well as English. And he's put in a lot of work to
Oh, yeah.
translate that rule book, which, from what I can tell, is not an easy task. And also our cards and things into the language. So that, yeah, if somebody is a speaker and they want to, or a learner and they want to play it entirely in Cherokee, that is available and they're in the box.
Yeah.
I
And
gotta
it's
believe that's gotta be really hard. Like, what's the Cherokee word for meeple?
right. Yeah, there's a number of technical things where he's come back and said, okay, there's not really a word for this, or this concept doesn't
Yeah.
translate directly.
Mhm.
Hey, can we change it to this for the Cherokee version? And we're like, okay, yeah, that still makes sense. Let's
Still
go
makes
with that.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Make sure.
even things like the convention that, like in a lot of games, we have the convention of replacing a word with an icon.
Yeah.
Like we'll define the icon and then we'll just put the icon in there to shorten everything. And then I had to have we had a conversation, and he was talking about, like, he's like, that doesn't make sense in Cherokee. Like, I can't read it and have it make sense. And so we decided that for the Cherokee version, like, it's all spelled out in words, but then the icon is also in there in like parentheses to, refer back to that. So
Yep.
there were some changes like that had to happen to make the translation work,
Mhm.
which was very interesting.
Yep. And while this is, we're sure there's been other games published in Cherokee, especially like educational game stuff. We do know this is the first one that's going to appear on Board Game Geek, because we had to ask them to add Cherokee as a language.
Yeah.
Yeah, which they did. Like,
Yeah.
they were really cool about it. But
Mhm.
yeah, I had to like go in and say, hey, this isn't a language that you don't have listed. Can you please add that?
Now, is there words in Cherokee that they just adopt the English word? Is that a thing that ever happens, or?
Yes, it does for certain things. So the way they adopt words over, so there's certain words sort of from the early colonial period, like the word for coffee is kawi, so it's just phonetically changed version of coffee, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes that happens. A lot of them, though, it ends up being the way the language works, it ends up being a description of the thing. So
Okay.
instead of just like phonetically moving something over, because the phonetics are very different between Cherokee and English,
Mhm.
the word will be a longer sort of description of what the thing does, right? It's very verb based, where English is very noun based.
Mm.
We're very concerned with what a thing is. In Cherokee, they're very concerned with what a thing does. And so a lot of the words are basically a verb form turned into a noun.
And then Dave, you're not Cherokee, right?
No.
So how have you kind of been able to, lack of a better word, add value to this conversation with also being sensitive to the fact that, you're not Cherokee, right? So you kind of want to.
So, I mean, a lot of my role on this project, one was purely mechanical side of things, just make sure things were streamlined,
Sure,
everything worked that side. And the other part of it was being the non-Cherokee member of the team. Every 2 weeks we'd have our kind of team meetings, and we're discussing all these different aspects. And a lot of it was, okay, if they started talking about something that was obviously for all of them very cultural relevant, they all knew what it was, it's good. If it was anything where I was like, hey, pause, I don't know what that is. I want it in the game, but we need to make sure we explain it somewhere.
Mm.
So I was there kind of as the outside force, just going, okay, we need to explain some of these things better for, the non-Cherokee. So we want to keep all that in there. We want to keep it authentic, but make sure we're explaining it. So that was a lot of my role, was just kind of pointing out the things that, okay, they're not even thinking about it because this is just it. They grew up with this. This is the normal to them. Here's things we need to explain a little bit more, or so other people can fully get into this game.
Yeah. And would you do more heavy lifting on the development side as well, for like dealing with the manufacturers and things like that, or?
And Will and I kind of split that. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of the talking to the freight companies and the fulfillment companies and all that kind of stuff. And then, I did early on did a lot of play testing, and then as I'd get the feedback to Will, he'd go in and do all continue development there. So
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So I'm hoping you guys can, and use as descriptive words as possible, can you explain the essence of how to play this game?
Yeah, so Winter Rabbit is a semi-cooperative hidden worker placement game, is the way I like to call it. So the story of the game is that we have predicted a harsh winter approaching, and so we've decided as a village to band together to prepare the village, and we made a friendly contest out of it. So whoever can provide the most wins the competition, right? And then Rabbit is this trickster figure. So Rabbit doesn't want to work. Rabbit just wants to mess with everybody. He wants to take stuff for himself and just kind of confuse the world. So the way the game works is that it is in some ways like a worker placement game where you're putting down tokens to in locations to gather resources. But the difference with Winter Rabbit is that you need multiple tokens in a place before anything is produced. So like we have to fill up the wood location before we can produce wood. And when that happens, everybody gets wood, and then if your token's there, you get extras. The trick is that you don't know which tokens are being placed. So, like on your turn, you'll draw a token blindly from the bag. You can, of course, look at it, but your opponents don't know what it is, and you're placing it face down on that spot. So, when those flip up, it could be your token, it could be somebody else's token, it could be a rabbit. And if it's a rabbit, the rabbit steals everything away to the rabbit burrow, and you can go take that back later. You get one token that you know is yours that you can play, and you can get more of those later. And you can build out village cards that kind of build up your engine and give you more resource storage, because your resource storage is limited. If you don't have enough resources, those go to the rabbit. So you have to constantly be managing what you're spending, what you're gathering. And then you can also tell stories that affect everybody. They're like new card powers that affect the entire board, sort of in a cooperative way. And there's also these tasks, and the task cards are really interesting because at the start of each season, which is like a round in the game, everybody plays out a task card that is a goal for the other players. You cannot complete your own, but you're setting goals for everyone else. And these are the main way you achieve points, the main way we prepare the village for winter. And when somebody does your task, you get a little resource benefit. So we're always like defining the goals for everybody else. So you can do that strategically. Maybe you want to be more helpful and progresses more toward being ready for that collective victory, or maybe you want to make things a little bit more difficult by putting a really hard task out there. So there's some strategy to that, and even in placing the workers, there's some strategy between, do I want to be helpful and place somebody where they want to go, or do I want to place them where they don't want to go? Do I want to put a rabbit on them to mess them up? So you can be really nice or really not nice depending on the situation and how far along the village is and things like that.
Yeah, and the game has a really good kind of push pull to it of the only way you're going to win the game is if the village is prepared for winter. And most of the actions that help prepare the village for winter are where you're getting the bulk of your points. So the game's incentivizing you to help each other. But it's the balance of how much do I help everyone else versus how much do I try to help myself. And yeah, it's got a very interesting, because when you start playing it, you can see the inspirations that came from 4X games. I mean, Will and I both love, a lot of 4X games, a lot of Euro games. So you can see kind of those inspirations, but then you can see how they were, as Will says, kind of turned on their head or tweaked to, from this more indigenous perspective, where it's not, the traditional 4X it is, where we're worried about conservation on the board, because on those resource production spots, they start out with some spaces covered. You can take those tokens off to get more production on a round. But then it's going to take more tokens to complete that later. So now you've just made that area, you've made it harder to get wood because you cut down too many trees. So you got to plant trees later to make it easier to get trees again. And so you're constantly, balancing, how much you want to help the group versus how much you want to help yourself to get where you need to go.
That's cool. The natural first, before I ask this, is I wanted to say congrats on your funding so far. You guys are only halfway through there. You're already at like looks like, I'll put it in Canadian dollars, it's the only way I can see it, $62,000 on looks like a target of 26,000, so more than double your goal.
Yep.
And you're only halfway through your campaign, so congrats on that. That's amazing. And I know you guys, this is one of the more successful campaigns for you. The natural thought where my head went to is there a market in some of the reservations for this game as well? Have you been having dialogue with some of the Cherokee communities about how they can get involved in this game and how they can support it and so forth?
Yeah, I have. I've been working with, talking to, hopefully we'll be working with in the future, but we've been talking to some of the shops in the Cherokee Reservation, in Oklahoma,
Mhm.
about that. We're working with Paymatawe Games, who's up there in Canada with you guys. They're a reservation game shop, and they're helping us with our distribution in Canada, and helping to get it out to some of the communities up there. And we'll probably be reaching out to some other places as well for that. On top of that, we also, in our campaign, we built in a donation program. So you can, in American dollars, it's $59 for the game. If you do $66, you get the game, and then $7 of your pledge goes toward us donating games to whoever needs them. Right? We're going to prioritize schools and language programs and things that are serving Cherokee citizens, and that could be any of the tribes, because there's Cherokees in Oklahoma, there's others in North Carolina and all over. So if you're serving one of those populations, you get priority. But we will happily donate as long as we have copies to give to any library, school, or other programs that want them. And this is a program that we started. I kind of got the idea from Connor of Comedy and Crow. He did something similar. We chatted about how to do that well, and decided that, and I decided this was probably a really good thing to continue doing this, because this isn't just about us, right? I'm drawing a lot from our cultural history and language and things to make Winter Rabbit, and I want to give back with what I'm taking, right? So I want to try to do a little bit of living those values that the game is trying to be built on. So yeah, we definitely want to give back, and we've got up to the where we're at now. I think we've probably managed maybe 50 copies to be donated, and I don't know where those are going to go, but I'm really happy about that. Somewhere around that, I haven't calculated it lately.
Yeah,
somewhere in that.
Yeah, vicinity. It's 50 or 60 copies, I think, so far, and very happily, we've had more people back at that level where they add a little bit more for the donation than we have at the just buy the game on its own.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of people who are happy to give us that extra couple of bucks to make this happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it always feels good when you can give back, right? Like when it's more than just making the game and kind of feeding the machine, but saying, how can we help seed this out into the community, right? And certainly I think that there's a lot of kind of cultural education here that would make a lot of sense to get into hands of educators, right? And in some of these community centers and things like that as well. It's I think it's an awesome idea that you guys have come up with here. Kind of what's the next step? Like, where do you guys go from here? Is like, as a company, I know you said you've kind of had 3 titles. I go back through Kickstarters. I think you've had like 9 Kickstarters altogether, haven't you? I think between the two of you.
We have a couple of those were not successful.
We learned from those.
They're learnings.
Well. Yes, exactly.
They were learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got 3 published board games. We've got 2 going really good solo RPGs that we published, and a couple other smaller D&D zines that we published. So yeah, next up, we've got a game that Dave designed coming up next. That one's as soon as we wrap up things with Winter Rabbit, that one's going to start getting art and getting going, and that's going to be a really, really cool game. I don't know how much you want to say about that yet, Dave. That's if you want to, or we could hold it back.
So that'll hopefully, knock on wood and everything, that timelines work out, but we'll hopefully kickstart that one sometime late next summer.
Okay.
But it's called Mirror Agents. It's a 2-player strategy game, dual hidden movement. So both players are openly moving a guard on the board, but secretly moving a spy behind a screen and trying to keep track of their opponent.
Oh wow, that's cool.
So it's I've had a lot of people say it's very brain burnery.
Yeah.
There's a lot of going on, and it's funny watching people, because I watch them as they get really tense. And like every time I watch a play test, people playing it, they get done, I just hear people like letting out a deep breath, like, okay.
Are you trying to determine where their spy is the goal to kind of catch their spy?
Right. So you're trying to use your guard to capture their spy, and vice versa. And you're also trying to use your spy to collect intel on the board to complete objective cards. So you can win one of 2 ways. Either you're the first to complete your secret objective, which requires you to complete a certain number of objective cards, or you catch your opponent 3 times. So you're constantly trying to, and as you're playing, you're trying to weigh do I go after these cubes I need, these intel I need to complete my objective, or do I kind of bluff to try to get their guard off track so I can try to work my way around? And so it leads to a lot of close calls and interesting plays as people are trying to figure out what what they're going to try to do. And
No, that sounds cool. We'll have to definitely get you guys back next year to
Yeah.
talk about that. For those who are interested in Winter Rabbit, I'm going to put a link in the show notes straight to the Kickstarter campaign. Check it out. Man, the artwork, I love the art in this game, and I think it's definitely your artist did a fantastic job. Like, it's definitely so beautiful to look at. And if people can't follow the link, you can simply type in Winter Rabbit, quite frankly, into Kickstarter, and you'll find this instantly. Will, David, I want to thank you again for your time, and I want to wish you all the best on this campaign. I can't wait to see how this ends. I think you're going to be pretty happy with where you land, my friends.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, guys, you take care. Cheers.
Right,
Thank you.
See you later.
This has been an episode of the Board Game Binge podcast, hosted by James Staley, produced by James Staley and Mike Bruner, with original music by Nick Smith. If you would like to watch these interviews live, simply subscribe to our YouTube channel, Board Game Binge, and you'll get access to live interviews, giveaways, and interesting board game content from across the industry. I can't wait for you to join us. See you next time.
We haven't gotten into doing a lot of live stuff. We've done a couple of we've done 2 streams of the game. We haven't been doing them on a weekly basis, but we did do right before we launched 2 streams.